Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Today's video is regarding another talk on current affairs, certainly in the nation of England. And I mean, for example, my work, the office is closed Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We're finishing work early tomorrow in Manchester due to planned protests / riots that are apparently going to be targeting charitable organizations, refugee centers, places where immigrants may reside. And I guess I wanted to respond to a question that I got in the comment section, which basically said, can I define far right and racism? Which I'll try my best to do without a dictionary in front of me. First and foremost, far right is often considered something that's extreme, something that is radical, authoritarian, something that is politically reprehensible. I mean, look, I would probably consider myself somewhat centre-right, a conservative, traditional chap. But that's very different to kind of, look, it's one thing to be proud and honoured to be of a certain people in a certain land. Don't get me wrong. And, you know, if we look at what it means to be a patriot, you know, a person who is willing to stand up and fight for their country. But now we have to look at what ideals and values that our country has. The irony, and I'll detour here and I'll jump back. One of the basic British values is rule of law, is that we are supposed to be a example of a civilized society. Now, looting and rioting doesn't sound very civilized to me. And so the irony there that people are up in arms about the lack of integration and assimilation by people who have come to this country, maybe through no fault of their own, due to, you know, valid asylum seeking claims, which, by the way, have most likely been instigated by US and UK tampering in their homeland. I mean, just look at, you know, decade upon decade for effectively the last over half a century of not infiltration, but, you know, certainly the West going in to civilize a people, really for economic gain of their own and control. My point being that people, whether they've come because they've sought asylum or if they've been invited because they used to be part of the Commonwealth, what have you may, the irony that because they haven't assimilated to British values, to then, you know, to go against basic British values of the right to practice religion, you know, the right to live in the rule of law in a civilized society, the concept of tolerance, be thrown out the window. It's an incredible irony there. It's like those people are going directly against the exact values they're supposedly attempting to uphold. So, I mean, back to the point, the far right is kind of, it's like ultra-nationalist, you know, fascist, which is to say that it's got this kind of intense, authoritarian, dehumanizing component. It's an us and them mentality, which I hate to put my tinfoil hat on and get kind of semi-conspiratorial, but this seems incredibly orchestrated to me. Working class people of, okay, different ethnicities, but effectively just different pawns on the same board, having to protest against one another while we live in a fundamentally classist system where there's people with tens and hundreds and thousands of millions of pounds who are completely removed from these issues, when you have, understandably, working class, you know, white British folk who are being absolutely affected by the cost of living crisis and their quality of life is diminishing. Well, they're obviously going to look for an outlet. They're obviously going to look for a reason to go up in arms. And when they see across the road a family of a different ethnicity who are doing better than them, perhaps because they avoid interest, perhaps because they have a fundamentally different outlook when it comes to the intensity in which they focus on education, the way that they club together and support one another, and they don't have the same individualistic nature as many secular English folk. What I'm trying to say is that a lot of these ethnic minorities in our country, whether they be Hindu or Sikh or Muslim, or even if they're secular, but they just have a certain ethnic background from the subcontinent, for example, or Africa, they're clubbed together and they work together in a way that may make them seem better off than the English folk. And so I can understand why there's a tension there. Don't get me wrong. I think what I wanted to say on this as well, and I'll come back to the far right and racist definitions, I just used that as a bit of a launch pad to get talking, is I actually understand the foundation of this tension. I think that immigration is something that is not being talked about, and you can just look at the Reform UK politicians in the House of Commons who are raising it and still kind of getting stamped down and avoiding the issues that very much do exist there. I was even listening to an inquiry on YouTube from 2021 of the people that came across in boats. 94 or 96%, the vast majority of those people haven't even been processed yet. And of the ones that have, I believe it was 6% have been processed and 85% were given asylum. But you're talking about huge numbers of people who are in limbo, who don't know whether they're staying or going. And in the meantime, they are being propped up by taxpayers' money. Rightly so. We should, have a conversation about this in a supposedly democratic society. Also, another thing that your Reform UK will be talking about is the benefit system, which is also a huge drain on society, necessary for those that need it, but surely it should be cut back, and an encouragement should be had to get people out working and boosting the economy. Makes sense to me. So my point is that I think that I want to actually give people the benefit of the doubt, not those that are painting swastikas on Muslim graves. Wa'audu billah. Subhanallah, that's an act of war, that's a declaration, and that's incredibly scary, because now it's making me feel like, there's some mad people out there. All of these people existed, and it's the right opportunity now for them to come to the surface. But I don't want to fearmonger and claim that that represents the majority of people who have legitimate concerns around, for example, immigration and general fanaticals and extremists. What I'm trying to say is that you have Islam, and you have the vast majority of people in Britain and in the world in general are normal, hardworking, loving fathers, parents, husbands, children, family people, paying their taxes and wanting a good life for themselves, their families and their community. And on the fringe, you have extremists who do absolute awful acts, atrocities, incredibly reprehensible. These people are psychopathic, mentally deranged. And in the same way, you have a majority of working class English folk who have seen their quality of life decrease, and rightly so, are frustrated, and because of, unfortunately, with the greatest of respect, an ignorance, they are blaming they're not blaming the government, they're not blaming the elites, but they're blaming their neighbours who are in the same position as them, effectively. And on the very fringe, you have these, far right would be, for example, seen as Nazi, basically. People on the streets, who are looking to cause trouble. And so I just wanted to say that I don't want to paint all people with these concerns with the same brush. That seems to be what happened. If you disagree with one component of, for example, an issue, liberalism, for example, you disagree with one component, you are now suddenly labelled as, the very extreme. It really reduces legitimate discourse. Another thing that comes to mind before I get back to the definitions is Lucy Letby, somebody like this, a nurse who killed 9 babies or something. She worked in the natal ward of a hospital in the NHS. Somebody who's clearly mentally deranged, a non-believing secular white lass. Now, any person with a reasonable mind does not kick up in arms, and the radical Muslim extremists don't start to attack the quote-unquote native population because of the acts of one person. In the same way, this Axel Southport murderer of these poor children, who, by the way, I have a connection with, a family friend's niece, or something of the like, was actually one of the victims. So this is only 2 degrees away from my own family. Weddings have been cancelled. People have obviously been absolutely heartbroken by this. And so my point is that this fella, who people crazily, the fact that this has then been an opportunity for the far right to jump on and attack mosques and blame entire communities of ethnic minorities, black and Asian folk, is so bizarre, because this guy wasn't even anything to do with Islam. This is just some black fella who I believe has kind of quasi-Christian roots. And so people seem to think that all Asians or all black people are Muslim. SubhanAllah, I am Muslim. I am English white man, I'm British. And a lot of Asians and black people are, Hindu and Christian, or just nominally. They might be called Muhammad, but they may not be fully practicing. They may be completely secularized. They may be completely secular. So there's a lot of strange thing that's going on. But I think it's interesting because the last time in Manchester this all kicked off was the George Floyd Black Lives Matter movement. That was the last time there was animosity in the city, and I'm feeling it again now. And this is, again, something that obviously exists in the hearts of the people, but doesn't fully declare itself until an opportunity arises. And that's what's really scary, is the fact that this stuff goes underground. This is why it's a new, for me, motivation to continue to talk about these things. So yeah, far right is basically ultra nationalist, forgetting that, foundationally, fundamentally, we are brothers and sisters in humanity, that actually, the external, melanin in our skin, the way we look, is less important than the fact that we all share, a heart and 2 lungs, and we all have the same desire to, live a peaceful life and have prosperity for our families. This is a broad statement, but generally speaking, we need to see the humanity in one another. And this is the problem when, at like porn pieces, we're able to be played off against one another, basically because of it's classism, basically, that we are living through class struggle. When people are struggling to pay their bills, they're obviously going to take to the streets. These people should be looking after their own families. What I want to say as well is that it makes sense to me to get away from all of the coping mechanisms which Islam beautifully and foundationally removes people from. Let's stop vaping, let's stop smoking, let's stop drinking, let's stop wasting all of our money on these subscriptions. Let's pull back, work hard, save money, and think about the future of our children and grandchildren, rather than waste all of our money on McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Netflix, cigarettes, and Budweiser. And, SubhanAllah, look to create the next generation of good folks. That's what the Muslims are absolutely exemplary at. The school systems, the madrasa and the mosques are their activities, education, support, community, family, together. I'm not seeing a lot of, I think that sometimes you have to take a bite of humble pie and look actually at what people are doing. You might not agree with their values or ideology, but what they're doing successfully. Straight away comes to mind is the declining birth rate, the low fertility in our country and across the Western developed world. Atheism, nihilism, secularism is not allowed, even though we're economically prosperous, even though we have all of the opportunities and education in the world, we can't even fundamentally, biologically serve our function of reproduction. Now, the Muslims are not having that problem. If you go to Egypt, to Saudi, to Turkey, the Muslim minority here in the UK Everybody's having babies because there's family structure, there's meaning, there's purpose, there's togetherness, there's community. So maybe we could learn from one another and not be, you know, the instinct for fear is so, you know, it's rational in the sense that obviously we want self-preservation, but the way we act when fear overtakes us is incredibly irrational. So I guess that's what I'm trying to get across here. Racism also is obviously prejudice and a kind of you're antagonized by somebody of a different ethnicity to you, which to me is just so bizarre. Like, you know, I grew up in my primary school and my first secondary school, it was complete all white people. It's Buckinghamshire countryside. So I'm completely used to being amongst nothing but white people. But then when I went to my second secondary school, which was international, people from all over the world, you know, don't think twice about what does it matter if somebody has a different background, a different creed, a different color. Certainly don't feel animosity towards them. Definitely don't have any tension towards them. So it's so bizarre. It's so tribal, which is exactly what Islam came to remind people of. The beautiful reminder that the white man has no superiority over the black man, and that the Arab has no superiority over the non-Arab. That there's only a hierarchy in our righteousness, our good deeds. Who are we as a person? You know, are we a good person? One person can be a better person because they do more acts of charity, do more acts of worship. They're a better, you know, they're an upright person in the community. And another person could be an absolute slouch, somebody who is doing nothing but taking from the community. Obviously one person is more beneficial than the other, but simply on appearance, on skin color, this is, people are talking about Islam being backwards. How can Islam be backwards when it fundamentally says that regardless of your ethnicity, who you are as a person is what defines you, not the fact if you're white or black? This came 1400 years ago. It took the Western world, the Christian world, the colonial world quite a while to catch up with this. So it's absolutely mind-blowing. So to conclude, the far right and racist are quite broad general terms, and I'm not labeling any individual this way. I say generally people who could be labeled as far right or racist have actually foundationally legitimate concerns. They should be directing those concerns not at the victims of a broken system, but at the orchestrators of a broken system. They should be focusing on, you know, getting their own ducks in a row, focusing on how they can escape the matrix, so to speak, how they can gain a financial moat around their family, how can they look to educate and support their children to give them better opportunities. It's possible, but it's not easy to elevate your position in a class system. You know, if people are born working class, then it takes a great amount of effort to move into, for example, the middle class, or, you know, even harder to move into the upper class, the upper echelons. The real issue is that each segment of society has a certain belief system and a structure, a kind of, you know, there's almost imposter syndrome. When you think you're a certain way, it's hard to break out of that. If you didn't grow up rich, then it's hard to see yourself and imagine yourself as somebody who deserves wealth. So I think fundamentally a lot of this is actually a class struggle, resentment and anger that comes from people not being able to fully manifest themselves. You know, the will to power that is present in each human that Nietzsche spoke about. And I think that fundamentally it highlights, like I said, something that is present within the society, but only at certain times is it allowed the opportunity to bubble to the surface. And so, yeah, may Allah protect us all. And hopefully, like I say, any benefit from these videos comes from Almighty God. All mistakes and errors are my own. My main message on this channel is a message of peace. You know, please give us the serenity prayer. I love it. Alcoholics Anonymous, that, you know, the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things that we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And obviously I can't change the opinion of people who don't want their opinions changed, but this is really, like I say, the whole point of this channel is an olive branch, is to say, look, that we're humans at the end of the day. And although I do agree there should be, you know, the immigration that's happened in the recent years, you know, post-pandemic, for example, is obviously extortionate and ridiculous and antagonistic. I agree with that. I think that, you know, net migration, you know, I like Farage, what he's saying, generally speaking. But obviously the problem is, even with Reform UK, is that they had issues with outright racist folk, and they had to be sacked from the party. So there, you have to accept that, you know, both with religion, it's associated with religious fanatics. Both with, you know, conservatism, it's associated with conservative fanatics. And we will lose our legitimacy as conservatives and religious folk if we do not outright call against, call out, and shout down when things go too far and become, you know, extreme, so to speak. So, like I say, love, peace and blessings. We should ultimately focus on ourselves as individuals, then our immediate family, then our extended family, then our community, and then, you know, our section of the nation, and then the nation state, which, you know, ultimately we do live in a nation state. So there does have to be borders, and there does have to be kind of, you know, having, our nation has to take priority over France and Norway. Of course it does, because otherwise what's the point? We might as well be a United States of Europe. Although I do prefer to... Anyway, I've rambled away. My main thing was to just open up the dialogue further, and I appreciate everybody listening. And always remember, big up your good selves, and peace and blessings. Until next time, good folk, Auf Wiedersehen.